Well, hi, hello. To welcome, first of all, to Harry Derbetsky and to Scott. Scott, how do you pronounce your second name so I don't get that wrong? You
Rebels.
Rebels. Thank you.
Rebels.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. And welcome to anybody who's watching. My name's Christian McNeill. I'm a three principles facilitator based in Glasgow in Scotland. And I also have a fairly extensive experience of the world of recovery. Harry is the main guest here today, although I'm delighted that Scott has also been able to join us. And both of you have, I think, rather different experience of the recovery world and considerable experience of the three principles world. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of you. And I don't know where you'd like to kick off, Harry. We were touching on some of the contrasts between the evolution of the three principles and the 12-step program, both
Maybe
of which,
I'll maybe I'll introduce myself just a touch, just
please
to get
do.
just to get a bit of the feeling of of who I am. Uh, in in the first movement of on Salt Spring Island, uh, I came in with my ex-wife, and we were attracted to Sid's message, and 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 what was noticeable about those days and where we were coming from was that it was a spiritual message, and the spiritual message uh, personified around two major words in my mind. It was about truth and it was about wisdom. And so Sid talked a lot about truth and that we were on a spiritual journey. And he talked very, very little about psychological. It was just assumed that if you went deeper inside yourself, you automatically would heal yourself psychologically.
Hmm.
And that's what I kind of got out of it anyway. And within the context of it, we had this incredible group of people, an incredible cohesion. And uh, uh, in that experience, we had tremendous amount of people, very poor people who were growing and living in a spiritual reality, and were meeting once or twice a week, either at Sid's house or at a gathering place on Salt Spring, and Sid would talk, and that fueled our journey to the first layer where we were the fruit. He sort of took what I would say was the worst people in the planet and said, okay, now we'll show you what truth can do for you. And it did. And then the second layer happened was the psychologists came in, and they had one incredible advantage over the first layer. The first layer really didn't have roots to share it, which is what one of the things you were talking about, Christian. But they so they had clients and they had a job that was directly applicable, and they had degrees, they were professionals in the world, and they were interested in taking it and making it into a psychology. And within that context, when Sid gave his first talk to all the psychologists, I listened to that tape CD when Sid was talking at Cedar Beach, and what I noticed was I was very interested. How did he introduce the psychological element to the people? And his primary message was what mind is, which is what he was talking about uh, to us, except it would be God or spirit. But now it was mind because it was a psychological group. And then he added one sentence and how it applies to life. And that primarily became the psychological evolution that you see that had evolved. He didn't actually get into describing all the details of the and so on. For me, I hated the psychological. I was strictly a feeling guy. All I cared about was life is spiritual and feeling good. And what was all this talk about problems? What was all this talk about people, wanting to discuss this stuff? That was extra boring, and it was also against my basic philosophy of life. And at the same time as that happened, I lost my gratitude. And when I lost my gratitude, I stopped flowing with Sid. See, it was an evolution. The three principles are not the three principles like a rock. They're an evolution that keeps growing and growing. You either grow and grow with the evolution, or you get left behind, or you get stuck in a separate reality. And the second one was what happened to me. Once I lost my gratitude, I stopped listening, and I missed the whole transition. And then we flash forward 40 years later, and I've worked a lot with the native Indians, which is a niche that nobody else knows about and touches. And I was still friends with Sid, but I was moving and teaching, and then now I was teaching the three principles, but I really didn't understand them. And it wasn't until I was 69 years old, a Christian, that I actually had the breakthrough where all of a sudden the flood's gates opened up and I knew what I was talking about. Within that context, as that happened, and now I had stepped into a separate reality, a reality in which all of a sudden I did know what I was talking about. I had actually finally finalized what Sid's teachings was to a beginning point, not an end point, to a beginning point where I was growing again in the feeling of what Sid was talking about, which was the union of spirituality and psychology together as one inside yourself, where the origin of psychology is, not in some kind of book of the three principles, which a lot of people are into right now. They're teaching the three principles from a book perspective. That is not Sid's teachings. It was never a book. It is a feeling. It will always be a feeling. And it's only from the feeling that you can really teach effectively to your patients, clients, or friends, or yourself. Of course, if you don't have the feelings, what's happening is you've got a lot of mental stuff that makes a lot of sense. Yes, it's ahead of the world. Still bullshit. Excuse the expression. Nonsense. Yeah, I talked to someone yesterday, Christian, a very strict woman. She says, you can't use that language around me. So I'm going to try and clean up my act a little bit. So,
well, you can relax here.
I can relax with you, okay? Yeah. You've heard it before, okay?
I have.
So, yeah, you actually sound and look like you have. So, okay. So when that transition happened, where I wasn't so much teaching from this, even and some feelings, I was actually just teaching the feelings had broken through, and my gratitude was now back again to where I was in 1976 when I had first started to live. So I had to go back to that feeling, Christian, of when I was listening to Sid. And when I stepped back finally into that feeling, I went, I'm home. Without the nonsense, or the other word I use, the bullshit, the nonsense of bringing this along with it. It has to be pure. Sid's not talking about 65% understanding the principles. You have to be in the now and speak. It has to be pure truth. Sid was his main number one message, besides it's inside you, is the purity of the principles. Not the expansion of the principles, the purity of the principles. And within that context, when I was left behind, I lost a lot of, I still was close friends with Sid, and I was still seeing him on a certain level of basis, but I was not only when I was working with the natives was I actually doing business with Sid. And your relationship with Sid was quite a bit different in business than it was in friendship.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people had a business relationship with Sid. Chip and Elsie and Jan had a business and friendship relationship with Sid. I had either one or the other, but more the friendship side, and then business when I was into it, and he was into helping me, but it was a different flavor, totally different flavor.
So say more about that. I'm intrigued about that.
Well, when you're friends with Sid, you're talking about anything and everything, and goals and objectives that we use in the straight world are it's just about having a relaxed conversation, and there wasn't, he wasn't talking awareness or anything. It was just simply sharing a nice feeling together, or I was insecure and he would make me comfortable and we would then be have a friendly feeling. So it would involve, I was his son's best friend. So it involved, I had a special, unique relationship with him with that, because he wouldn't talk to anybody else about his son. He would a little bit, but not like he talked to me, because he knew I was his best friend. So we had a whole different thing. And he knew I was hearing things about him that nobody else was hearing about him.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to find out about dad, talk to the son, type of thing. You find he's not exactly totally enamored with the enlightened man all the time, type of. So and hanging out with Sid as a friend meant I liked him as a human being. Like we all like Sid Banks as an enlightened being because of the wisdom that he has shared with all of us. But I liked Sid as a human being too, and I was very comfortable with Sid. A lot of people were in awe being around Sid. I wasn't really. I'm not saying I didn't have that, but primarily I was comfortable. I was comfortable telling him he was wrong too. Like that, we were just, buddy. He was even when I slipped so much, he was incredibly loyal as a friend, and that meant a lot to me. He didn't leave me behind. You lost it now. Goodbye. See you later type of stuff. Now, business, well, the first time I entered into business, I was surprised. It was kind of like, you got a job to do. You got to do it right, and he was quite adamant. And you have to remember, I had a lot of bad habits, Christian. So, and a lot of airy-fairy ideas in my head. And so that didn't go well. Sid was a very practical, would you agree, Scott? A common sense type of guy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he always stayed the course. Well, again, you get back to the feeling and just the way that he put things. I think sort of at the beginning, I'm always trying to find the holes in things, with people and whatnot. And he was always consistent in what he said. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And he was very much, if you were missing it, which meant, Christian, that you were in your head rather than in your heart or your feelings, it's like he was very adamant, that wasn't good. And so you would be in the energy, and then you'd be out of the energy in business. And when you were out of the energy, that meant you were not included, in the scenario. And that sometimes was quite ruthless in the experience of it, because you were quite enjoying being in the in group with the in energy, and it was very uplifting. And while you're being lifted by this energy, you've got Sid's energy and the group's energy, the people. You're what you're seeing and experiencing is so alive and big in comparison to what you were before. But in that, Christian, the teaching was you have to be yourself. You have to bring yourself along. At first it was, ooh, what these people and you, and you sort of followed it, and then you got left behind, and you said, next time that happens, I'm going to bring myself along in what I think as well. And so it's the same message. It was just a little bit higher energy than we were used to being exposed to on that level. And in the context of business, I wasn't I wasn't too uncomfortable because I had come from a business world, and I was the treasurer of the Sydney Banks Foundation. So I was used to dealing with Sid on a certain level within that context. Then he disbanded it because it did not express what he was teaching. So what his sole source of income, which most people don't realize, there was even a Sydney Banks Foundation, which we were all giving, I think, a grand total of $25 a month type of thing. And that was his sustenance for it, to keep him alive. He disbanded it because we were not reflecting the purity of his message. And so within that was difficult for me to deal with because I had status, and status is good, as you know, as long as you're on top. No good when you're on the bottom and can't break into the club. And that continued to be a teaching of Sid until he died, was that he would break up what was expanding and that was supporting and was making bigger, and break it totally up, because it did not express the purity of the truth as uncovered by Sydney Banks. And that was his main concern. His legacy was not going to be on the size of the three principles or the size of this truth as uncovered by Sydney Banks. It was going to be measured by how the purity of the principles were going to be expressed. And to this day, that was why he set up the school in the last year. He knew he was dying, but he taught Chip and Elsie and Jan about what it was to have good teachers, and that the feeling behind the words were the important message, not the actual words themselves. And so that school has allowed for myself especially to have really, since I got left behind, you have to understand, Christian, I was there at the beginning, not right at the very, very beginning, but close enough, and I was right inside, and then I lost my gratitude, and then I lost everything. I wasn't along with all the psychological stuff that was evolving in the three principles. So I had to catch up. And I not only had to catch up with what Sid's message was, which was the psychological, now it had become a spiritual psychology, but I had to catch up with an understanding caught up with my little mind, my ego, my concept of what the three principles were, my opinion of everything. And I wondered why I didn't have real effect on so many people. I mean, I was teaching a lot of people, relatively speaking, but I wasn't having the impact on people that I was hearing from other people. And it wasn't until I really broke through that I saw the reason for that. It's not the words, it's the feeling. You speak, Christian, from a feeling of love inside yourself, which you do quite a bit, by the way. One thing I like about you, you're not putting on airs. There's an example of it. If you put on airs with the three principles, you ain't got nothing.
It's such a comforting thing, isn't it, that who we are is enough. That it's
Go ahead.
Of course, one can you're always going to learn more and go deeper. And that's been my experience, even in the relatively short time of 7 years or so that I've been involved in it. But at the same time, who I am today, who you are today, is enough. It's just
more than enough.
Yeah, lovely. It's just so comforting. You know, and not only enough or more than enough, but actually essential. That anything else won't do. Anything else won't get you there faster. I love the fact that authenticity is the currency. Yeah.
It is and that's what we're teaching, is we have to see that in the heavily addicted. I call it heavily addicted because
Mm-hmm.
that's what I primarily work with. And if we can't see and feel that in the people we're talking to who are heavily addicted, I'm pretty convinced you're not going to be too effective. You're going to give them some of the scientific and psychological information that will help them move along a bit, but you will not really be teaching Sid's message.
Mm.
Sid's, on Monday, we had a very unusual class, and the essence of the class was that it was very disbanded, and the first I'm not going to get into the details of it, but and then all of a sudden this guy who's very soft spoken and talks about what he's always talked a little bit what he's experienced, and I've always interpreted it, Christian, as well, if you're had an experience, why aren't you happier, and so on. And I sat beside this guy while he talked to the rest of and he talked for about 20 minutes of what he had actually experienced. And I'll tell you the truth, he's ahead of a lot of people in the three principles in what he's experienced. And he shared, and he did say it's very difficult for him because in his world he has nobody to talk to about what he had experienced. And as he's sharing it, I could feel my veils of thought, images fall away. I could feel the teaching that he was doing for me. Now, I'm not talking about I have more compassion here. I'm talking about truth. The man was speaking pure truth of what he had experienced and what he is experiencing and the way he sees life. I don't know why he's not happier. He certainly has a deep spiritual experience. But I do know one thing for sure, that deep, clear spiritual vision and experience that he has is the answer. And he is going to uncover it. It's just a question of when his puzzle is solved. And that's not for me to say. That's for me to try and enrich and so on. But so we're in a world where we're talking that even people like Donald Trump are actually, in the context of what's inside of him is a purity of incredible love. What comes out because of this is a different story. That's a separate reality that we express in our unique form. And but if you can't be yourself, I think you're dishonest. I think dishonesty is the key to the three principles. And if you can't be honest with yourself, well, you have nobody to blame but your own dishonesty.
I'm wondering on that note if we could cut back to the title that we were playing with in advance of this, and the title was Sid Banks and the Three Principles: A Revolution in Recovery? ? And you've touched on the fact that you work with Native peoples, and that you've touched on the fact that some of that work is to do with people who are what you've described as heavily addicted. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you got into that and what your approach is.
Sure. First thing, if you want to find out what you should be doing in life or in the three principles, go to your true self, to your spiritual self, because it takes you to those scenarios. So in both cases, Christian, it had nothing to do with me. Zero. And I'm going to, so initially, when I got left behind, I says, I better get on with this show, or I'm going to totally miss total contact with Sid. And so within that, that's like a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a prayer. You do. So prayer is good. Now, not prayer like prayer in church is good too. Don't get me wrong, but that's not the type of prayer. More like prayer, like a native does. You know, like to a connection to the Great Spirit. And so I said, I better get on with the show. And I'm looking. I'm way behind now, and I have this yearning. I says, oh man, it's such a good, it's like it's pure truth. I want to at least be part of it and start sharing with people and so on. I don't have any credentials, and I'm behind in levels of consciousness, and that prayer was answered when I went with my family, and we're traveling, and I stopped in front of a mountain by myself, and it was clear cut. The mountain was clear. Oh, it was ugly. Oh, it was disgusting. Ugh. It was like mankind is such a pig, you know. Oh, disgusting. And white people, even worse. You know, it's just disgusting. Money, money, money. And I mean, we're talking about pure beauty here. And I'm sitting there with this disgusting feeling, and this native woman walked up right beside me. So there's just the two of us. And I said, not a word. She said, not a word. We totally got it. We totally had the same feeling. It was so obvious, and she was teaching me in a way that would silence, in total silence. That's the native way. That's why the 3P is so hopeless with natives. They think it's yappy. Well, yappy don't get it, cut it in native world. And talking, they don't care about talking. They care about participation, sharing a feeling. You know, talking, anyone can talk. They've heard it all anyway. So we shared this deep spiritual feeling of disgust, and also something even more. And I walked away and said, I should work with these people. They have feelings like I have. And it wasn't very long after that I was working with the natives, and now 40 years later, or 30, I still am. And I'm now considered a man of the spirit. I'm considered an elder by certain others see prejudice and so on. But I do many powerful spiritual ceremonies. In fact, this weekend I'm going up. I'm going to do a special ceremony with the natives. It's ironic. With this community, there was 200 people, one white guy, and the white guy is doing the ceremony. It's kind of ironic. How could that be? But it is, because that's the way the spirit works. And so that I had to evolve into experiencing this assimilation, native spirituality, 3 principles. How do they join together as one? Because we know they're both pointing towards the same thing. That was very helpful for me. And when I kind of broke through, I looked at my life and I said, I'm very content. Oh man, simple life. I didn't have any financial problems. I was quiet, peaceful. It was the life of Riley. But I was a little bit, not bored, but you know, it felt like I could use a little more stimulation. And so I did another prayer. And I said, you know, I wouldn't mind something a little more, you know, just something, you know, I'm very happy and content. I don't need anything more, you know, I certainly don't need fame and adulation and all the bullshit that a lot of people are into. I didn't care about the 3 principles, the movement, the way it is and stuff like that. Kind of boring to me. And within that context, I woke up the next morning and right away. So that night, prayer, next morning, bing, phone call. Harry, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm working in this program with the heavily addicted. I got offered another job. You want to take over the program? This is 15 months ago. And I go, heavily addicted. My worst area, when I did it, I was just hopeless with it, with the native. And I always left with such a yucky feeling and stuff like that. And of course, in my lower level of consciousness, Christian, I was trying to fix the problem and dealing with the problem. And so dealing with it on that level, because I saw it as a problem, I was just a masterful failure. It's nothing worse than a stupid person who's a bullshitter. Nothing is worse. And there I was, Mr. Perfectly bullshitting bullshitter type of thing. Scott can relate to it. So sorry, Scott, I have to get a dig in there. So here it was, my worst area, the one I hated the most, the one I didn't like to deal with. And of course, in the native world, alcoholism had wiped out only 100% of the people. Only 100% were alcoholic. That's all. The rest weren't, So you could see a pretty major influence on a beautiful people that I loved tremendously, but it was a negative thing and created a horrific past, along with, of course, the white people's ideas of life. And talk about pigs. Ooh, that's a disgusting story of white people. So within that context, and I love white people, don't get me wrong, they're good for business, stick to it, and so within that context, I said, well, I just prayed, so maybe I'll give it a little try. And here's the joy of it. Because I didn't care and I didn't really like it, I didn't go in with any preconceived ideas. I just went. I didn't have anything in my mind that I was going to talk about. I didn't have, and that's a very big thing. You're not teaching 3P if you're going in with a thing in your head. That's not Sid's message. And you've got to remember, he's the master, not us, not the psychologists or the people who are teaching. Elsie and Chip are not talking from a preconceived talk. They're just talking, and that's why they got the feeling. And that's why what they're teaching is pure, because they're teaching the feeling rather than the a good script.
Yeah.
Yeah.